Hey, you guys have asked me to do a series on the American government and how it works. So here's going to be part one. Alright guys, this is how we Americans get taught how it happens. I don't know how they tell you British lads, how it happens. But what happened from our standpoint is there came into the 1750s, there was the 13 colonies up and down the eastern seaboard of the North American continent. And there was also provinces up in Canada and colonies in Canada, but especially large was the French colony of Quebec. In 1753-ish or so, 1752 and 1753, there was problems between the French and the Native Americans that lived there. And this came to be called officially in 1754 the French and Indian War. And what was happening was the French were repelling the Native Americans. The Native Americans were coming down into the South, into the American sphere, the British colonies' sphere of influence, and also into the British colonies of, like Massachusetts, Maine, and so forth. And the British were like, wait a minute, we don't want these people here. So, and besides that, the French were saying, we're going to pursue them because they're going to go down to America, down to the colonies, and the British might help them and actually start arming them to come back and fight us, the French, back here in Quebec. So the British sent some troops because the French were threatening to come down. The British king sent troops over, and the Parliament sent troops over to, that's going to become a big part of this, the Parliament and King of England, sent troops over to be garrisoned in the colonies and prevent the French and Indian War, and actually go into Canada. And, the British were empire builders, so they, basically fought the French and beat the French in Quebec at that time. Well, at the same time they were doing that, all of these troops were here, estimated at times up to 50,000. Who is paying for that? Well, the British Parliament did this, but the king got the rap for it because his name is on everything. In the English system, everything is by the sovereign. But it was actually the Parliament that actually did this. And they started taxing American citizens, or rather, well, they were still colonists, and started taxing them for the pay for these troops. Because the way the British thought, well, these troops are saving you, so you need to pay for them. But before that, they were already taxing the colonists. So they put an extra tax on them. And besides that, they started forcing Americans to quarter them in their homes. And Americans were like, we're paying soldiers to live in our house? Because the British also knew that the colonists were getting a little bit antsy. And we're getting a little bit rebellious, or things were being said. They were already starting to separate. And this was also another way of, you get troops living in your house. You can't rebel. If you've got to live with British troops, they're going to be there. They're going to say something to their officers, and then, boom, you get smashed. So there was a lot of tension going on. Well, the French and Indian War ended in 1763. But those troops didn't leave. Those troops stayed. And now on top of that, they withdrew some of them. I will say they withdrew some of them, but they left a lot of them there. and that was threatening to the colonists because they were still having to be paid by the colonists. Whereas around the world, the British weren't doing that to any other colonies. Only the American colony were they forcing them to pay for their troops to survey them. Well, also, the British Parliament then lost a lot of revenue because they didn't have as many troops, so they weren't getting as much money because they were also gouging the Americans, and the British Parliament was taking some of that money and putting it towards other things. But what happened was is they said, well, we need that revenue back. So they started passing taxes through Parliament, and of course, as is always in English law, the king, the sovereign, has to give their assent. So the way the Americans saw it was, this stupid king is taxing us. And they put a stamp tax on, they put a tea tax on, and they put taxes on booze, the whiskey tax, and it was just too much. The Americans started saying, wait a minute, we're being taxed, and they won't even allow us to have a member of Parliament from our side to go in there and argue for us. And that became the slogan, no taxation without representation. And that was the American colonists' basis for the start of their grievances. So there was legitimate reasons the colonists were kind of pissed off, and their anger was directed at the king, and it really should have been directed more at Parliament, the House of Lords and the House of Commons, because they were the real causes for those taxes, not the king. But the king had to sign them, so the king got the blame. All right, I'm going to leave it right there, and we'll go to independence on the next episode. Take care. Be really good to yourselves, and workers unite.